Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalrin, and in today's video, I want to take a look at some of the Battle for Azeroth classes and certain specializations, take a look at them closely, and offer some ideas, maybe even criticisms, on how I would go about maybe trying to fix those classes. We all know that Battle for Azeroth is coming out very soon, and after BFA finally releases, after we're all done leveling to max level, Blizzard is going to start patching and updating a lot of the classes and balancing things. And I'll be honest, most of the classes on BFA have been absolutely awesome. I spend a lot of the time on the beta playing as many different classes, as many different specs as I could, trying out many different roles, and while I don't know them in an expert fashion, I do know them on a baseline. I am going to talk about this video from more of a fun factor, certain things that I noticed while casually exploring some of these classes, and by no means am I touting myself as some kind of an expert, but I do want this game to be fun. I do want a lot of these specs and classes to be fun, mostly because, one, that means I have more people that I can enjoy the game with, and two, more people enjoying the game means probably more viewers for the channel, which is also great. Anyway, let's begin. I feel like the first part of the video that's easiest to cover is talk about classes that I don't want any changes whatsoever, or not enough changes that are worth making a video for. Warriors have been pretty great with changes to Fury. I'm actually excited. Paladins have been pretty awesome with how they're reverting them towards more Cataclysm days. Hunters have been awesome, and so have Mages and Druids. Those are the classes that haven't had too many changes that I've been unhappy with. For the most part, I am mostly satisfied. So I'm going to omit these classes in particular and any of the corresponding specs of those classes. So let's get on to the problem children and talk about what I liked and what I didn't. In the first list, we're gonna go off with rogues, as it makes sense. Outlaw and Assassination have been awesome, and there are more advantages to playing these two specs than disadvantages. The one spec in particular that I could maybe do some criticism on is Subtlety. Mostly from the talents. Subtlety plays awesome, and the way that it plays with gear feels great, but in the talent rows, what I noticed that Subtlety doesn't really have, like the other specs do, is that perfect uniformity. What Blizzard has done in BFA, which I think is a good thing, is put certain talents like, let's say, resource generating talents and mobility talents, AoE, single target, how you burst against one another, so it's a little bit more of a narrow choice. So you have AoE talents versus other AoE talents, single target talents versus other single target, the way you generate, let's say, energy and common points versus other ways you generate energy and common points, whether it be more energy generation or simply value abilities. With Subtlety, I feel like there are some abilities that make you feel like you have to pick them, depending on the situation. Oh, is the situation going to be mass AoE 24/7? I feel like there's a talent like Shuriken Storm that I just have to pick for the maximum burst. Are you going to have single target and maybe light cleave? Well, I feel that Secret Technique is going to be the must go. If you are going to be playing Subtlety for AoE, the burst playstyle ends up being better, so Dark Shadows ends up being a lot stronger than, for example, the talent that allows you more charges of Shadow Dance for more consistent base playstyle. So I feel like that's where you have certain rows where there's just not that much uniformity. So I would like for Blizzard to take a look at them again, maybe at least by the time 8.1 rolls around. Priest is also another class on the list, but I know that Shadow is getting changes in 8.1. That being said, I don't want to be too harsh about it, but I do want to say that the community for Shadow Priest have been pretty vocal when it comes to Shadow Priest changes, and they got some pretty cool ideas that I actually agree with. One of those ideas being make Void Form, which is a form you go into out of Shadow form once your Insanity reaches close to 100 or 60 depending on the talents that you pick. Once you go into Void Form, they think it should be a cooldown rather than a mechanic with our resource bar. Mostly because going in and out of Shadow form made sense in Legion when we had the tools. We had the artifact weapon and all the extra traits of the artifact weapon that made it fun to play around with. It enforced you to want to stay in that Shadow form, and it gave you the tools to do so. By removing those tools and not making them baseline, you're keeping a mechanic that requires tools, kind of like a car without a key or the engine. So they might as well redo it. They might as well scrap it and turn it into something else. If Blizzard do want to keep the whole Shadow form and Void form together as part of your playstyle, then maybe make it easier for you to shift in and out, give you more upfront tools. Or if you don't want people to stay in void form for too long, then maybe make it a cooldown where you pop it and it lasts maybe for 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 25, that gives you a bunch of shadow damage, and then it kind of disappears until you get it back again. This would make the spec a bit more uniform, but it would make it also interesting because now it would revolve around a burst. I like that idea. Maybe even make it a 1-minute burst, so you can burst kind of often, so you can be more competitive in PvP, but also be pretty decent in PvE. I think that could be a good middle ground. Next class on the list are going to be Death Knights, and for the most part, I'm fine with Unholy. I think Blood DK seems like a cool spec, but Frost is where I just don't really... I didn't understand at first what was going on with it. So the problem that I have with Frost is the damage and kind of where the sources come from. I feel like there have been a few changes to the spec that I don't like, primarily from your damage sources. Because of the way that they changed a lot of the melee classes in BFA to be more focused around auto attacks, Frost Death Knight ended up being a class where a good chunk of your damage comes from auto attacks, and you even have talents to speed up the auto attack damage. On top of that, Blizzard decided that Frost DK is going to be a class that has damage over time that is a good core part of their damage. So your dot from your Frost Fever, or otherwise I'll call it the Common Cold, because I never thought of Frost DK as a dot based class, and your auto attacks basically take up almost 2/3, if not half, of all your damage output. So then you can have the Frost Death Knight that already has strong auto attacks and strong damage over time. You can't really have their sources like Obliterate and Frost Strike nearly as powerful, which I feel like takes away from the fun factor of the big Obliterates for Frost Death Knight. I think the best way of going about this is maybe to tone down heavily the damage over time of your Frost Fever to kind of have it be a novelty, kind of something you throw on a rogue to prevent them from being able to re-stealth on you. But then increase the damage of your Obliterates and your Frost Strikes. Or change up how your resources work to maybe make Obliterates very strong, but Frost Strikes very weak, to kind of take away power from Frost Strikes, but give it back to Obliterates. I feel like we need to have some kind of a bursty potential for Death Knights, especially when they're a class that has been so heavily centered around burst, but Blizzard is trying to kind of force them to play very sustain heavy as of recently. Shaman is also another class that is on the list, even though I am probably going to end up playing Shaman as my top 5 classes for BFA. I know that they're getting changes in 8.1, so I'm not going to go too harsh, but I am going to give a few ideas of what could happen. So far, I found Enhancement Shamans without the artifact weapon to be a little bit heavier on the RNG. You're kind of waiting for your abilities to kind of proc off of one another and then trying to take advantage of those procs. Now, I played an RNG based spec, Outlaw, all of Legion, so maybe I'm just getting tired of the heavy amounts of RNG, even Outlaw rogues that kind of drop in a lot of the RNG components. But with Enhancement Shaman, I think it would help the spec to be just a little bit less RNG heavy. I don't know if they would add the artifact weapon back as an ability. I think adding more abilities to the spec would be great, but if they were to somehow mitigate the RNG heaviness of the spec, I feel that would be great. Unless everybody likes the RNG damage. And then for Ellie, one thing I would say is maybe make it not as rampy. Elemental Shaman blasts people with Earth Shocks, and you can get some insanely cool RNG damage out of the spec. RNG is not really an issue with Elemental, but I do think that it's very ramp heavy. It takes a while for you to get to the point where you can finally start doing damage. So I feel like if they were to make the spec maybe less rampy on your Maelstrom generation, I feel like it would put it in line with some of the other specs in the game. Then we have Warlock on the list, and for the most part, I'm happy with all 3 Warlock specs, maybe except for a few gripes that I have with Demo. Don't get me wrong, the rotation and the playstyle for Demo is awesome. I love the feel of just being able to summon demons and grow my army. It feels great, and even just the rotation, I feel like objectively, is one of the more fun playstyles in all of Battle for Azeroth. But what I don't like about Demo is it's not really good at spread damage. For a spec that relies on pets, you don't really rely on them like a damage over time ability, where an Affliction Warlock can dot a bunch of targets that are spread out. The Demonology Warlock kind of starts falling short. It seems that Blizzard wants you to be a heavy single target focused spec, but it would be kind of cool to maybe have some kind of a snapshot mechanic with your pets. Maybe when you summon your demon dogs on one target, you can enable some kind of a setting in your spells where those demon dogs would lock onto that target and not let go no matter who else you start attacking. So then you can get an army of imps A third of your imp will attack one target, another third will attack a second, another third will attack a third, or maybe make it so certain abilities have this kind of snapshot mechanic to it. I know that they want you to play around pets, and sometimes that AI just doesn't work how you want it to, which is another point I would like to talk about. Demo, the main pet AI, in PvP in particular, sometimes makes me feel a little bit worried about myself. Like, sometimes I get my Doomguard to attack an enemy, and I tell him to stun the enemy, but my Doomguard then starts spinning. The stun goes on cooldown without stunning anyone, but it still goes on cooldown, so I have to wait for it for a while. I would want the AI for Demonology Warlocks, at least for your main pet, to function a lot similar and smarter like a Beastmaster Hunter. And as a Beastmaster Hunter, whenever I play that spec, I never have any issues with my pet. Windwalker Monks are in a decent spot, except for a few things that I don't like about them. The one thing I could say about Windwalker Monks is I feel like it's so heavily GCD'd on abilities. It's very similar to a Fury Warrior at the beginning of BFA, when you were relying on 3 different cooldowns to pop that you would use to at the same time. Now you're having to pop them separately. So I feel with Monks, with so many abilities being on GCD, it adds to clunkiness for the gameplay. Also, for PvP, a lot of people miss Fist of Fury stun, and I understand that. I decided to myself that if I am going to play my Windwalker Monk, I am going to accept the fact that they don't have a Fist of Fury stun, and I tried it out. Now, the Fist of Fury stun and the loss of it is not terrible, but now it feels that the ability simply does nothing. So I feel if Blizzard were to remove a stun, let's say out of my Rogue toolkit, like for a kidney for example, if they were to completely remove a stun component, I would at least want a kidney shot to have my character punch the enemy in the kidney and do a good chunk of damage at the very least. So I feel like there's a little oomph they need to add to the ability, and I think the best way of going about it is maybe make the ability hit really hard now that it no longer stuns enemies, or at least have formidable damage, because right now it feels like it kind of tickles. And finally, we have Demon Hunters. Now, I actually enjoy Demon Hunters a lot, and they are a fun spec to play. There's a lot of cool new talents on how you can do damage to enemies, and I absolutely love that Blizzard decided to get very creative with Demon Hunters in particular. Having Demon Hunters have been an awesome addition as of Legion, no matter what most people say, and I had my personal gripes with them before, but with the way they play right now in BFA, I actually like them. They're kind of hard to play because of the very low PvP survivability. And I checked some forums and I see a lot of people asking for buffs in terms of their survivability. This one is kind of hard, as I don't really know any ways to fix Demon Hunters. When you take a look at them for PvP, they actually have a lot of good defensives and healing mechanics on paper. They have a minute defensive on Blur, which is, or can be up to 50% damage reduction, and a dodge against melee. They have Darkness, which can just make him immune to certain abilities, kind of on RNG. They have a lot of mobility and even abilities to get them to fly up in the sky, out of reach of most melee and even some casters. And they have Leech to their abilities if they spec into it. But because a lot of their cooldowns are now on a big DR, like your Imprison now can no longer be spammed nearly as often, and your only stun is on a 1 minute cooldown, it makes it a little bit difficult for the spec to compete with some of the other class changes, I would guess. I don't really know how they would go about helping out Demon Hunters with their defensive nature. Maybe for PvP increase a little bit of their versatility so they can take more of a punch, but I do like that high risk, high reward playstyle, where you're very squishy but also you have a lot of potential damage to you. So I don't really know how they would fix it, but I see a lot of people in the community asking for help for Demon Hunters. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you think there's a certain class change or a certain issue that I didn't get to cover or missed for one of the classes or specs for any of the classes in this video, feel free to write in the comments below. I, like most of you, want to make BFA as good of a game as possible. And we know that Blizzard is working hard at a lot of these classes and specs, but they can't get all of them right. So I feel like it's always good to give a bit of community feedback on what you think as somebody who plays these classes day in and day out. What do you think would help them, and how could Blizzard go about fixing them in the easiest possible ways? Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As per usual, all our links like Discord link are in the description down below, so feel free to follow those. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see all of you guys in another video.